Okay,
Recording.
thank you. Hi guys, I'm Chantal Shoei. I'm the founder of Always Choose Adventures. We're a local nonprofit here in Colorado, and our mission is to help people of all ages and abilities get outdoors and access adventures. I actually found Jim just organically through Facebook a couple weeks ago, and I understood that he had this awesome new book that was just released. And we just started um, a book event, during COVID. So we're like, oh well, maybe Jim should be the next speaker. And I just started his book, and I think we picked a really, really good one with his experience. And I'm really excited to read more and learn more about Jim. So he is our speaker this evening. He's from Fort Collins, Colorado. He's been a climber for 39 years, and he's a high altitude expedition leader. Jim has been on successful ascents from Argentina to Tibet and from Bolivia to Nepal. Along the way, his teammates were commended twice from the US Park Service for volunteering for successful high altitude rescues. Jim has shared his intense experiences on TV with CNN, CBS, ABC, NBC, and PBS, and more. In addition, his survival story was made into an episode on the international TV show, I Shouldn't Be Alive. His amazing survival tale and the lessons learned from it are shared in his co-authored New York best-selling book called The Ledge. The Ledge was selected as one of the best-selling books from Amazon. Jim is here tonight to share some of his lessons and experience with his new book, The Next Everest. It was just published, and you can grab it locally or on Amazon. With that, here's Jim.
Great. Well, thanks for coming out tonight, everybody. Sorry, a little mix-up with the link, but I'm glad you're here. There may be a few others coming in. I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to go to, that's very interesting. Let's see. It's interesting. I got one menu hiding the other one here. So stand by for a minute. It is not letting me click on that. All right, let me come out of that a minute. We'll go back in. That's very interesting. Because I'm the host, it's hiding that menu.
So you can grab that black part and just move it down.
There we go. Thank you.
Yep.
Good. My first time hosting. I'm usually the speaker, but tonight I'm doing a little hosting duty. So
And
thanks for your patience.
We can see that. So grab the menu and move it all the way down.
It should disappear in a minute, right?
There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's get rolling. So sorry for the delay. Thanks for joining us on a beautiful evening. We'll try and make it worth your time instead of being out in the sunshine. We're here to talk about this book, The Next Everest. Came out about a month ago. It talks about my trip wanting to go. Oh my goodness, come on. Are you still there? Okay, good. Are we still running, Chantal?
Yeah, you're still running.
Great, I had a glitch on this end, so sorry for the rough start. Okay, so I first read about Everest when I was like 10 years old, reading old National Geographic magazines and my parents' black and white encyclopedia, this big long encyclopedia in my parents' basement. So I first read about Everest then, thought, wouldn't it be great to go there someday? But I was born in Massachusetts. I didn't have any outdoor skills at all. It was just a distant, distant dream. This is a picture I took later of base camp here. This is on the south side of Everest, on the Nepal side. We're looking at the Khumbu Glacier, that white stripe in front of us. You can just see a little bit of base camp in the lower left with a few yellow tents, if you look carefully, strung from left to right. We're looking at the Khumbu Icefall, that sort of steeply sloped ramp up the middle there. We'll talk more about that. The peak on the right is Nuptse, 25,000 feet. And that triangle at the front is actually the west shoulder of Everest that peaks out at about 23,800. And that triangle in the back, that's Everest itself, 29,029 feet when I climbed it a couple of years ago. Now it's been upgraded to 29,031.86 feet. It didn't actually grow that much. It was more of a resurveying thing. So that's what we're talking about, is trying to get to Everest. I'm having a glitch here on my clicker. That's interesting. That's very interesting. My computer's sort of seizing up, so sorry about this. It's running a little slow. So I'll just keep on rolling and hopefully it'll sort itself out. How do you go from being a beginner to someday to getting to Mount Everest? Well, you can't get there right off the bat, obviously. It comes in many layers over many years. When I first started doing it, I made a list of some of the skills that I was going to need just to become a basic hiker. So you had to learn about clothing and footwear, hiking and technical skills, learn how to take care of yourself on the trail from a nutrition and hydration standpoint, and basically start learning a little bit of first aid as well. Most of you people listening have probably done some of this in your general hiking or snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, any of that kind of stuff. And when it comes to training, you're going to have to do several things as well. Certainly just general fitness. You know, the average American might not be able to walk on a trail for 4 hours. Probably most of our listeners can. But then you start piling on more and more of the skills and the training, building your aerobic capacity to go for a longer period of time. Maybe a little anaerobic capacity. We'll talk about sprinting later. A little bit of strength from maybe weightlifting and other things, a little bit of endurance. All those kind of skills can take you on some pretty good mountaineering trips. Snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, backpacking, whatever. I started in New England doing small peaks like this one called Mount Washington, 6,288 feet. This is me back in about 1984, I guess it was, maybe 85. But I was in New England. I knew if I wanted to climb the bigger peaks, I was going to have to go out west. So in 86, I moved to Colorado to get my master's degree in geology, started climbing on our Colorado Front Range peaks and going up, in this case, on the left-hand peak up to the Wind River Range to do some multi-pitch rock climbing up there. On the right-hand side here, East Vale, climbing right off I-70, learning how to do some ice climbing. And I did this kind of general mountaineering, climbing all of the United States, climbed a bunch of peaks from about 8,000 feet up to 14,000 feet, including Mount Rainier here. We're looking at the north side of Mount Rainier, the Liberty Ridge kind of going up that steep arête going up the right-hand side there, heading for the upper ice blocks or the seracs. So this kind of stuff can take you pretty far, and you can spend your whole lifetime doing this kind of stuff and not really have to get into super high altitude or super advanced kind of climbing. But if you do want to try and improve your skills, you're going to have to up your skills. You're going to have to up your training with that. If you're going to climb on the bigger peaks, you're going to have to learn how to be a competent leader, going first on the rope and putting that protection into rock and ice. You're going to have to learn self-rescue skills because sooner or later, something's going to happen to your team. And you want to learn technical rescue and evacuation skills because sooner or later, you're going to be on a climb and somebody on another team is going to have a problem and you'll get involved in the rescue of them. My partner Rodney Lay is with us tonight. He's been with me on a couple of rescues and been on many rescues himself as a search and rescue person. And that's what you want to have on your team, people with a broad set of skills, whether something goes wrong for your team or something goes wrong for an adjacent team. You're going to have avalanche skills, especially if you're here in Colorado. Also, as you're going to have to move up to the next level, you're going to have to get much more intense about your training. The old saying is the best training for climbing is climbing. So doing sports-specific stuff, whether it's rock or ice or mountaineering, you want to train those muscles that you're going to use. Being in the gym and doing box steps and pull-ups and bench press are all good basic fitness, but that's not climbing. So get out and climb as much as you can. And over time, you're going to have to learn how to train your antagonistic muscles. You might think, oh, I want big biceps so I can pull up. Well, that's good, but if you don't train your triceps, you're going to get injured. You've got to train those antagonistic muscles to have a balanced body and avoid injuries. And avoiding injuries and learning how to recover from injuries is also part of being an adventurer because stuff's going to happen. You're going to sprain your ankle. And you're also going to have to work on your longer endurance skills because if you're going to go on these bigger peaks, you might be out for 12 hours, 16 hours, maybe even longer. And you have to learn how to manage yourself in these longer endurance runs. Well, once you get those kind of skills down, you can go on expeditions. Rodney with us tonight invited me on my first leadership role to go to Nepal back in 1998. So we took student groups over there from Colorado State University, and we went over to Nepal and climbed 18, 19, 20,000 footers. We also took student groups down to Bolivia. We took them down to other places in South America, including Ecuador. There's Rodney on the left-hand side in his dark jacket, and our partner Terry in the middle here. We went up to Alaska to climb on Denali, highest peak in North America, and 20,320 feet. And here's some other pictures from other trips we did down to Ecuador. Also went down to Mexico. There's some, if you want to do your first high altitude trip, I recommend South America or Mexico for these Mexican volcanoes, 16, 17, 18,000 feet right outside Mexico City. Pretty easy, pretty cheap for us to get to for sure. Well, finally, if you decide you want to go even further, you want to go on big expeditions, things that are going to take you to the highest peaks in the world. Well, now you're going to have to really bump your skills up and your training. And at this point, it really doesn't become about how many pull-ups you can do or whether you can climb 5'10" rock or whatever, learning some cool way to flick your ice axe. It's really about how to advance the team forward and manage the team for longer periods of time. Because if you're going to go climb some of the highest peaks in the world, say the 8,000 meter peaks, and 8,000 meters is equivalent to 26,000 feet, and there's 14 peaks like that in the world. If you want to go on those kind of peaks, you're going to have to learn to do a lot of planning and logistics, expedition planning, international travel, multi-camp logistics with base camp and camp 1, 2, 3, maybe camp 4. How many stoves does that require? How much rope does that need? How many sleeping bags does each individual have to bring? Those are the kind of things that you're really going to have to think a lot about. And certainly the team dynamics, the leadership, and the teamwork is going to be a factor as well. We're not going to get too deep into that tonight. We'll talk a little bit about that in our part 2 of this, which will be an in-person event that we'll talk about at the end tonight. The training is going to have to get more intense too. When I went on my first 8,000 meter peak in 2009, I really had to up my training. And then when I went to Everest in 2015 and 2017, I really had to up my training again. And you can learn a lot about this from other resources, from the Training for Alpinism website that Kevin runs, and from Training for the New Alpinism, the books by Steve House and Scott Johnston and Kilian Jornet. But you have to learn how to peak at the right time just before you go on the expedition, how to taper so that you recover before you get on the expedition. You can't show up exhausted at the base of the mountain. You have to do super endurance too. Can you climb for 24 hours? 36 hours? Can you do that without sleep? Can you do that on minimal calories? And I did even more training with stacking on training days and deprivation days, which is, can I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just start climbing? No food, no water, not enough rest. Can you get up and start doing it? And that's all training your body to get ready to tackle the big peaks. So I took all that with me, and after being a climber for about 2009, so about 30 years or so, not quite, I went over to Choyu in Tibet and climbed the 6th highest peak in the world, and that went pretty well. It was a 44-day expedition. That was really tough to manage my life before I went on that trip, to make sure everything was taken care of while I was gone through my friends and family, and then to catch up with life and work when I get back. And that's a set of skills you're going to need if you're going to go on these 8,000 meter peaks. So I want to answer a little bit about one question, which is, why would you do all that? That sounds like an awful lot of work. If you're doing it just for looking at pretty vistas or hiking or getting a little exercise and recreation, you don't have to go through all that, and that's true. So I want to read to you a short section from the next Everest when I try to answer the question of why do I climb. Your reasons will probably overlap some, but they might be a little different. So let me read about a minute here about why I climb. Most mountaineers I know, especially those who stick with it for many years, are moved by passion and the desire for continual self-improvement. My climbing partners and I share a mutual commitment to keep each other safe and to help one another achieve our dreams. That camaraderie is powerful. In Himalayan tea houses and noisy mountain taverns, I've had deep conversations with fellow climbers about what drives us. We often speak reverently about peacefulness, spirituality, and connection with the earth. Long alpine days bring satisfying exhaustion to my body and quietness to my mind. Mountaineering is a form of moving meditation. While some people seek their passion through music or marathons, for me, it's mountains. Climbing not only allows me to nurture those meaningful aspects of life, but it also lets me experience personal growth while traveling through some of the world's most magnificent wild places. The high mountains exemplify immensity, intensity, and inspiration. In essence, I climb to seek awe. And I think that's one of the keys for all of us, is to figure out what gives us awe. Is it music? Is it marathons? Is it kayaking on the ocean? And pursue that, because the energy that you can put into it is immense. The passion you have for it is immense, and what it can give back to you is immense. And that's what can convert you into a better version of you. By trying to raise yourself up to meet those higher goals, you have to do more and you have to become more. And that's what we get out of these kind of adventures. We probably do it, most of us, for outdoorsy reasons, but other people will do it for different reasons. They'll do it for the running or the music or the meditation. So all that passion and all that awe-seeking finally got me to a place by 2015. I'd been a climber for about 33 years. And I was finally ready to go off to Mount Everest. So I trained super hard. I was going to be 52 years old. So I knew I had to train some of the best I'd ever done in my life. And I went off to Nepal in the spring of 2015. And if you're a technical climber, you probably get some peaks in mind in the Himalayas. But even if you're not a technical climber, if you just want to go there and go trekking, which is backpacking from hut to hut in the backcountry, you can have an incredible experience. And going to Nepal will change your life for the better. So people go there for tourism reasons, trekking, and climbing. And if you go over there, of course, you're just surrounded by a sea of peaks. But if you are a climber, you're always looking up at the biggest ones. In this case, we're looking at a series of 25,000 foot peaks and sub-peaks here of the Nuptse Lhotse wall that's kind of running from left to right. And in the back, just sticking up, is that triangular peak way in the back. That's Everest. And you can see here as we zoom in, it's a clear day. Interesting. When I let someone in for hosting reasons, my computer seizes up for a minute. So that's why I'm having mixed response on my computer here. So sorry about that. So we'll hopefully get it back in a minute. All right, now we're back to moving. So Everest is sticking up into the blue sky. Not a cloudy day, but you see a cloud coming off of Everest. That's actually a plume of blowing snow, because Everest is so tall at 29,031 feet now that it sticks into the jet stream, and the snow blows off the summit with those winds at 50 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, almost all year, except in the spring. Storms will form off the Bay of Bengal and push the jet stream winds off of the summit of Everest, and the winds will drop from 150 miles an hour down to about 5 miles an hour. And that's when we want to be there in position. And that means we have to go to Nepal 6 to 8 weeks before we're even going to make our summit attempt, because we have to climb lower peaks to get acclimatized. We have to put our camps in place. We rely heavily upon the Sherpas to help move that equipment and install the fixed ropes that we're going to use to keep ourselves safe. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And also, most importantly, we're letting our bodies get acclimatized. And our bodies need to grow more red blood cells and get used to that high altitude. We can't just go to the base of the mountain, even if we're the strongest climber in the world, and race to the top of Everest. We need to go very slowly and get acclimatized and get used to the mountain and let our bodies get used to the low oxygen. Otherwise, we have no hope of ever reaching the summit. Darn it, every time I let somebody in here, my laptop seizes up for a minute. So we're moving onward. Finally, after all those small training hikes, after all that slow approach trekking, we're at the base of the mountain. We're at 17,500 feet. We're looking up and we can see Mount Everest. Well, you can't see Everest here. We're looking at the West Ridge on the left, and the summit of Everest is behind that and 6,000 vertical feet higher. We're camped at 17,500 with some nice prayer flags going overhead. We see the White Khumbu Glacier in front of us. We can't quite see the Khumbu Icefall because it's hidden behind the fog here. But if we look at the next picture, we'll see a picture of the lower Khumbu Icefall. Now, this is the most dangerous part of Mount Everest. What we see is 3 little black dots in the middle, and those are 3 climbers starting to enter the lower part of the icefall. Now, the Khumbu Glacier is a very famous glacier, and the Khumbu Icefall occurs because the glacier goes over a series of cliffs, and the glacier loses about 2,200 feet in elevation over just about the course of a mile and a quarter. And what that does is it breaks the glacier into lots and lots of different chunks. And what we see here is chunks of a glacier here, anywhere from the size of microwaves to maybe the size of your garage or something. And between each of those broken up chunks is a crack in the ice, a crevasse, a glacial crevasse, a big crack that drops tens of feet or maybe even hundreds of feet inside the glacier. But as we pull back here a little bit on this picture, we'll watch the 3 climbers disappear and we'll see the scope of the Khumbu Icefall. It is comprised of thousands of ice blocks. And these ice blocks are anywhere from the size of your garage up to the size of the tallest skyscrapers in downtown Denver. They're all shifting, moving, flowing, collapsing on one another, falling over. It is the worst place I've ever seen as a mountaineer. And nobody would want to go in there. But over the course of almost 70 years of mountaineering from the south side of Mount Everest, nobody has figured a way to climb the southeast ridge, the normal route from the south side, without going through the Khumbu Icefall. You can avoid it somewhat if you go to the north side of Everest, but there's other aspects about safety and route selection there as well. But if you want to climb Everest from the south, you got to go through the Khumbu Icefall. And not just once, but many times, about 6 or 7 times over the course of the expedition. So to minimize that, we do a couple things. First of all, we get acclimatized on smaller peaks nearby, 18 and 20,000 footers. We also climb partway into the icefall to get a feel for it. And we start to practice on these fixed ropes and these ladders that span across these crevasses. So I want to show you a short video here, just a little bit of background sound of what it's like sometimes when we can't go around the crevasses. We're going to go straight over the crevasses on these ladders that are put in place by a team called the Icefall Doctors. And I'll talk about them after we watch this video. Well, walking across one of those ladders is scary enough. Putting them in place would be super scary. So there's a team called the Icefall Doctors, and they're very experienced Sherpas, and they know how to put these ladders in and put these ropes in. And they do the hard, dangerous work of going first for the entire Everest community. There might be 30 or 40 expeditions on the south side of Everest in any one year, including this year. And they all sort of pool some money and they hire these Icefall Doctors to put these ladders and ropes in place. Because realistically, in that kind of a dangerous setting, we can't climb like a team of two like we would in the Alpine here in Colorado, belaying each other, taking turns climbing one at a time. Everybody needs to move at the same time. Everybody needs to move as fast as they can. Basically, trying to max out your aerobic capacity for 6, 7, 8 hours at a whack to try and get through those dangerous places, because the ground beneath our feet can collapse. The ice cliffs above us, those seracs, can fall on us. So that's how we get through those dangerous sections in the Khumbu Icefall. And if all goes well and you make it past the Khumbu Icefall, when you top out, you kind of get on an upper shelf of the Khumbu Glacier. And this is getting us close to Camp 1. And when I moved up to Camp 1, I climbed up with my Sherpa, PK Sherpa from Port Say. He's a fine young man. He spoke some pretty good English. I spoke a little bit of Nepali, so we kind of helped each other out language-wise. And just got to know each other as a team because we're going to be climbing closely together for the rest of this expedition in 2015. The only trick was he was about half my age. I was 52 at this point. He's about 25. So he moves a bit faster than I did. And sometimes speed is safety in the mountains, but sometimes getting to the next camp in good shape is the key thing. So not burn yourself out by going too fast, just fast enough to get there. So we moved up from base camp to Camp 1, and we got this beautiful view of this upper part of the Khumbu Glacier. It has several other nicknames. One nickname is the Western Coombe. And that's a Welsh word spelled C-W-M. And it basically means valley with a dead end to it. And that's what we have here. We're looking 3 miles across the upper Khumbu Glacier to the peak of Lhotse at the other end of the valley. It's about 28,000 feet tall. It's the 4th highest peak in the world. On the right-hand side is Nuptse with vertical walls that soar 6,000 feet above us, up to 25,000 feet. And on the left-hand side is the west shoulder of Everest that soars up 4,000 vertical feet above us, up to about 23,800 feet. Now this valley is also called the Valley of Silence. And climbers have given it that nickname because with these huge steep walls around us, it blocks most of the wind and it's very, very silent in there. It's also amazingly hot. Now when you climb Everest down in the lower part of the mountain, you have to deal with temperatures regularly going down to 20, 25 below at night, probably minus 30 or 35 on summit night up high. In this part of the glacier down by Camp 1 here, the big problem is heat, unbelievable heat. During the day, say at about 1 or 2 o'clock, when you're standing out here, the air temperature feels like it's about 70 or 80 degrees, and inside your tent, it will be more than 90 degrees. When we're resting in our tents, we strip down to our underwear, hide our tent beneath our sleeping bags to get a little shade, and we lay there with our arms spread out, panting like dogs in the heat. So at 2 in the afternoon, it's way too hot in the tent, and when the sun goes down about 6 o'clock, you're putting your down suit back on. So literally the temperature swing can be 110, 120 degrees on an average day down here in the Valley of Silence or in the Western Coombe. Pretty intense place. Well, we moved up from base camp at 17,500 up to Camp 1, 19,800 basically, on April 25th of 2015. And that's the day a major earthquake slammed it in Nepal. Biggest earthquake in 81 years at 7.8 magnitude. So I want to show you a little video footage here of what it was like when we left base camp, climbed through the Khumbu Icefall in the dark, got to Camp 1, and what it was like when that earthquake slammed into us when we were camped on the glacier at 19,800 feet. Let's watch the video. Going to Everest is something that I've read about for 40 years, and daydreamed about for 30 years.
focus on the rungs, not the drop. Close to 5:20 in the morning. Half the oxygen there is at sea level. Here comes the powder blast.
Other breaking story, the worst earthquake to hit Nepal in 80 years.
Dozens of climbers are waiting for rescue at Mount Everest base camp after a deadly avalanche. 4 Americans are among the 18 people who died in that disaster. It also left more than 100 mountaineers stranded higher up the slopes of Mount Everest.
There was a huge avalanche and a huge powder blast.
Just harrowing. And joining me now on the phone from Everest is mountain climber Jim Davidson, who's stranded on Mount Everest at this point.
There might have been 2 avalanches. Can't tell.
Just a short time ago, I spoke with Jim Davidson. He's a climber from Fort Collins, Colorado. He survived the earthquake and the avalanche.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed for all our compatriots down in the ice fall. And we'll see what happens over the next couple hours.
Well, as you can see, a pretty terrifying situation. We didn't first feel the ground moving. We realized something was wrong when we heard an avalanche come ripping down off the west shoulder of Everest, coming 4,000 vertical feet down and towards us at Camp 1. Then we heard a second avalanche start roaring down off of Nuptse, 6,000 vertical feet, roaring at us from the other side. And that's when the ground finally moved. Our tent shot up into the air about 8 inches, hovered, and dropped back down. Then it went back into the air again, and it went back down. And that's when I realized it was an earthquake. And my teammate and I tried to scramble out of the tent because we didn't want to be inside the tent, because that surface area of the tent is going to act like a sail or a sea anchor and drag us deeper under the avalanche. So we started scrambling out of the tent. I took a few seconds to turn my avalanche beacon on. There was that annoying beeping you heard in the background of the video. And we rushed outside to see if we could see where the avalanches were coming from, but we couldn't see anything because it was the usual afternoon clouds that we have every day in springtime on Everest. So we could hear the avalanches, but we didn't know where they're coming from. Then the wind started showing up, and you saw that wind blowing the snow around. And that wind wasn't because the weather suddenly changed. That wind was there because the avalanches are coming straight at us, and they're bulldozing the air out sideways. The wind was blowing sideways from 2 intermittent sides as we're outside the tent. So I want to take you to the moment when we were trying to be outside the tent. All of a sudden, this pulverized ice dust started falling out of the sky, and we couldn't even breathe, so we all dove back into the tent. So I want to show you a picture that I took of a little video of myself. I took some video with the GoPro at that point, and I want to read to you a little bit from the next Everest of what was going on in my head right then. So when I dove back inside the tent, I'm coated with snow, choking up ice dust, and here's what it's like at that moment. I opened my eyelids, but only had a blurry view from the ice dust and water droplets covering my eyeballs. Blinking a few times cleared my vision. I was alone. "Bart, Bart, where are you?" I yelled. I could hardly hear myself over the roaring winds. The Valley of Silence was no longer silent. The tent stopped gyrating. I sat taller and thought, is it over? Then an even stronger gale slammed into the north side of the tent, where the second avalanche was still cascading down. At any moment, the airborne crystals would give way to bouncing ice blocks the size of microwaves, refrigerators, or even houses. I'd been hoping that maybe the avalanches would veer away from us, but the unceasing powder blast proved they were still coming our way. Everyone in camp could be buried in another minute. Gloria and the kids flashed through my mind. I put my left hand on my chest and clutched the avalanche beacon tight against me. Pretty scared, as you can see from that photo there. We got lucky. I wrote up a story about this in addition to the next Everest. I just wrote a story about the earthquake and the avalanches arriving for the Explorers Journal, which is a journal put out by the Explorers Club. The article was called Courting. There's a 2-part article. The first one was about the avalanche, called Courting a Restless Goddess, excuse me. There was a part 2, had a different title. And I want to show you a little image from that. I know you can't read this left-hand one too well. This is one figure from it. And this is a Google kind of an aerial, oblique aerial photo, probably up at about 35,000 feet here, looking over nearby peaks, base camp, and where we were. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I know the words are a little fuzzy, but what we have here in the middle where those two white arrows are, that's where we are at Camp 1. So I'm going to circle that in red here. That's where our camp was, right in the middle, and those were the two avalanches that came at us from both sides. They scared the heck out of us, but they ran out of speed and force before they hit us. Nobody in Camp 1 was hurt. Nobody in Camp 1 was killed. Amazing luck. Down in base camp, though, they had a different avalanche here. We're going to circle it in blue. And this avalanche consisted not just of wind and powder snow like ours, it consisted of rocks, lots and lots of rocks. And those rocks went down 3,000 vertical feet and rushed across the glacial moraine right into the middle of base camp. And sadly, that's what turned this day into the deadliest day ever on Mount Everest. 70 people were wounded in base camp from that wave of rocks that went through, and 18 people were killed, making it the deadliest day ever. The 19th person died later on as well. Now, we wanted to get back down and help our fellow teammates on our team and other teams as well, part of the Everest community, but we couldn't because other avalanches had taken out the fixed lines and those ladders through the Khumbu Icefall. So we were stuck up there at Camp 1. We could hear their cries over the radio. A lot of us were wilderness first responders and guides and paramedics and whatnot. We wanted to go help, but we could not get back down. We are stuck and marooned temporarily at Camp 1. Now, I'm an environmental geologist. I've been a geologist for 20 years. So I knew there would be aftershocks, and I knew those aftershocks could be as much as 90% as big as the initial quake. So I warned our team leader they were going to happen, and sure enough, they happened. We had a couple of moderate ones, and at the 24-hour mark after the initial quake, we had another huge set of aftershocks, 6.8 magnitude. Now, this time I got my GoPro camera started a little bit earlier, and so 24 hours after the earthquake, here's what happened when the 6.8 magnitude aftershock hit, and we had more avalanches. Let's watch a short video.
Yep, almost right on the 24-hour mark. Damn it. And it's cloudy, so you can't see.
Yeah. We're okay, you guys.
Okay.
We were okay. That was smaller.
No.
Remember, a lot of the stuff came down yesterday.
Came off yesterday, right?
Yeah, just take a deep breath. You know, it's scary. It's just, Camp 1, we're fine.
Now let me leave up that last frame of the video there. That's our team leader, Emily, with the white hair and the white blue jacket and the walkie-talkie in her hand. Think about the things she just did and the things she didn't do and the things she said and didn't say to be a leader in that moment and inject some resilience into us, some confidence. See how we're all starting to turn around. You see people in the background starting to look at Emily, starting to move towards Emily. And when we get together on June 10th, we'll talk a little bit about during a moment of difficulty in the mountains, whether it's something small, like someone sprains an ankle, something medium, like someone's broken a leg, or something huge, like an earthquake on Everest. How can you be a resilient team member? How can you be a resilient leader? I want you to think about that in the intervening weeks. And if you get a copy of the book or the audio book of The Next Everest, think about that as you go through, because there's some lessons I put in there, hopefully that'll be of some value to people when you go off on your adventures. I want to square up what happened here on 2015. We'll talk a little bit about 2017, and we'll take your questions in about another 10 minutes here. Well, we were stuck there for 2 days. We couldn't get back down. That first day after the earthquake and when this aftershock set came, they used some available helicopters to fly the wounded out of base camp. They moved about 70 people out of base camp to a couple of remote medical outposts nearby. So the wounded had been taken care of. And they were slowly starting to gather up the bodies from the deceased, sadly. We were stuck for another night after the set of aftershocks, and we knew we just couldn't stay here anymore. The snow was falling. There's going to be more aftershocks. Rebuilding the route will take days and weeks that we don't have, and a big storm's coming in a couple, 2 or 3 days as well. So the decision was made by the base camp expedition leaders to fly us out by helicopters. They brought in 4 helicopters, and over the course of about 6 hours, these 4 helicopters made trip after trip, doing a very dangerous and unprecedented evacuation of all the climbers from Camp 1. There were about 110 of us in Camp 1. About 70 people up at Camp 2 walked down to Camp 1 and joined us. So we had about 180 climbers, guides, and Sherpas and support staff at Camp 1. And these helicopters normally carry 5 people, but in this case, they can only carry 3, the pilot and 2 passengers, because these things are barely flying at the limit of their power. So we took turns getting on 2 by 2. We got people out first, just a very small day pack. Most of our equipment we had to leave behind. Some of that, but not all of that, was recovered later. And I had the scariest 1.5-minute long helicopter ride of my life. soaring back down over the Khumbu icefall, looking straight out the window into the mouths, gaping mouths of crevasses. Some old crevasses that had been there for days, weeks, decades, and some new crevasses that had opened up just in the last 2 days from the earthquake that had rattled the glacier. So we flew down, and I was glad to finally get off that glacier and put foot back on relatively solid ground, although I didn't think of it as solid as I used to, but stepped onto the ground at Camp 1. But as soon as we had done that, I realized we had stepped out of one problem and into a different problem, because we are now at the center of a mass casualty incident. 70 people wounded who have been taken out, 18 rising towards 19 dead. And within an hour of landing, my teammates and I got involved in going over to the one and only field hospital and digging through with our hands and shovels and pickaxes, trying to move away dirt and rocks to recover some medical equipment from the overwhelmed field hospital that had been wiped out by the avalanche debris. So we tried to recover some medical equipment for the walking wounded that are still around base camp and for any more injuries that might happen. We also got involved in recovering some bodies and putting them on helicopters to fly them out. That was a very emotional and traumatic experience as well. This is a particular rock here. Some people are spreading some gear on top of the rock to dry out. You see a lot of debris at the base. That's not trash thrown on the ground. That's some of the remains of the 100 tents that were destroyed by the tsunami of rock and wind that ripped through the middle third of base camp. That gear is scattered all the way across camp and even way off into the distance in the slide. You can see 2 people out there walking around, looking at debris, looking for bodies, looking for their personal belongings. This debris had got spread over about 10 acres and just blown thousands of feet downwind out of camp. When you look close underneath this rock, there was a small handmade black cross where one of the 4 Americans that were killed, sadly, where their body was found and recovered and later flown back to their family. To try and explain what was going on with the earthquake and avalanches, I made this figure, and it's in the front of the next Everest. I don't know if you saw it, if you got the ebook, but it's certainly in the front and the back. You can see a little bit of it there of the book. It's called an end paper. And you don't have to worry about all the details on here right now. It's there for reference, so you can try and understand the locations of the mountains and the locations of the avalanche. The most important thing I want to point out to you right now is we're looking down on base camp, kind of right of center here. And I want to point out this blue kind of curving strip here. And the blue peak, the blue strip starts up on the peak of Pumori, a 23,000 footer where the avalanche started. And the avalanche came down 3,000 feet, kind of following this blue path and the white arrows. That's where it came down. But what's amazing is that the avalanche went over a mile sideways across lumpy ground that should have kind of absorbed that approaching wave of debris and wind. But what happened, I think, is that a bed of air got underneath that avalanche and kind of smoothed out the transport of that over that rough ground and helped propel that rock debris right into the middle third of base camp. Just a terrible situation. Everything kind of came together from a bad situation of geology and topography and timing and position, and it tended to route that flow of debris right into the middle of camp. So that was the sad situation that came together, and that's what caused all those fatalities down in camp. Now my computer's going to seize for a few seconds here as I couldn't let that person in, and hopefully we'll get it back. If you have a drink, now's a good time to take one. I'd be drinking one if I had one. All right. Still waiting. This is why you shouldn't be the host and the speaker at the same time. Okay, so we're back in business here. This is looking from the down end, the downwind avalanche, the distal portion of the avalanche, looking back in the direction it came from. There's some wrecked tents and a few standing tents between us, and you see a low hill there with a lot of white smeared on it. That's the notch that basically the avalanche got accelerated through. It came from way up that slope behind us. You can see the lower half of the Pumori Lington ridge behind us. It was another 1,500 vertical feet up behind it in the clouds. So that avalanche came straight at the camera here, shot over that low notch, and it smeared ice and snow on that notch, and that notch accelerated the the avalanche and debris fall right into base camp. So that's how things became so bad in base camp. Well, on our team, we stuck around for a few days to help out around base camp. We knew the expedition was over. Climbing's not important after such a tragedy. And it was a huge tragedy across Nepal. Almost 8,900 people across the Himalayas lost their lives. Tens of thousands of buildings wrecked, tens of thousands of schools. And as we started to descend down the Khumbu Valley below Mount Everest, we tried to pitch in a little bit as we could. here we are in the village of Portsay, where my Sherpa friend PK was from, and a lot of our Sherpas lived in this town. So we stopped there for a couple of days to let the chaos level at the airports die down and try and see if we could actually escape the Khumbu Valley. So while we were there, we helped disassemble this house that was partially collapsed. That's me in the blue jeans and the gray shirt on the upper left wall. We're taking off the slate roof stones that you see in the foreground. We're trying to recover those incredibly valuable logs. And those logs are the main beams of the house, and they're carried on the backs of yaks almost 40 or 50 miles from lower elevation. So we're trying to save those for the family. We passed the hat around and collected some money. And eventually, after about 12 days, we made it from the Khumbu Valley and flew out to Kathmandu. And when I got into Kathmandu, I saw myself in a mirror for the first time in about 40 days. Took a picture and threw it on Facebook just to let people know I'm safely out of the mountains. I'm back in Kathmandu. I thought I'd get a lot of comments like, hey, it's great you're out of the mountains. Try and rest up a little bit. But what I got was a lot of comments about how I looked. And I thought, what are you talking about? I'm not beat up. I'm safe now. And people were like, no, you look traumatized. You look scared. You look overwhelmed. And I didn't see it at first. I'm like, no, I'm fine now. I'm back in Kathmandu. But then when I looked at it kind of through my eyes as a wilderness first responder, I kind of looked at this person, the patient, and I go, oh, I can see it in the eyes now. This person's been kind of traumatized. They've been beat up. And so at that point, unfortunately, I realized that I was probably a little beat up too. And so what I had to do is kind of start taking care of myself a little bit. So I realized that I was going to have to try and do the best I could for the people in Nepal, but also take care of myself and get myself home. So I eventually worked my way back from Nepal back to America, and I got involved in doing a lot of fundraising for Nepal to raise money for Nepal's rebuilding. So we spent weeks and weeks doing fundraisers and things like that to raise money that we donated to the Z Foundation, which is a Nepal association that does, an American Nepali association that does a lot of rebuilding of schools and hospitals and things in Nepal. And it looks like my computer stopped again because someone else is trying to join us. So sorry for this, folks. This is what happens when you do two jobs at once. I've got to wait a second for my computer to clear up and hopefully let us advance. Which it's not doing. Should do it here in another few seconds. Looks like it takes about 10 seconds for it to free itself up. We'll see if it's going to. I don't think it's going to. It looks good and frozen to me now. Chantel, are you seeing it move advance?
I see your picture of yourself and that's it. And it should be letting people in by themselves, no?
It's not. I've been letting them in, and every time I do that, my computer switched from presenter mode to host mode, and it kind of seizes up for a little bit. So let me try one last thing. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back in and share again and see if that works. All right, we advanced through. So I'm not going to push any more buttons. We're just going to see if we can make this work. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to wrap this up here in about 5 minutes, and we'll take a few questions. So I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to Nepal after all that. In fact, Rodney, who's with us on the Zoom call tonight, I talked to him from base camp, and I said, Rodney said, hey, what do you think the chances are you'll ever go back? And I said, here? I don't want to come back here. Probably a 10% chance I'll ever come back. I just want to get out of here and get home. And that's the way I felt when I left base camp. When I got home, I did a lot of fundraisers, and people would ask me, hey, I've made a donation. What else can I do to help Nepal? And as a lot of you may know, Nepal is a country that's poor in financial resources. They really count on tourism, trekking, and mountaineering. So I said to people, hey, once Nepal gets back on its feet, you should go back there. Tell them, show them that they're not forgotten. Spend your dollars and your euros, spend some money and try and lift Nepal up a little bit so they can lift themselves up. So after I said that a bunch of times, I thought, maybe I should go back. So after watching Nepal for a year and watching the Everest climb in the season of 2016, I decided it looked like Nepal was back on its feet enough, the mountain was safe enough, so I decided to go back and do it all over again. So I trained all over again, applying everything that I'd learned that we talked about in the early part of this talk about training, more gym time, more ice time. There's Rodney again, as always, with standing by me to help me get ready for the big peaks and sending me off on my way to Nepal. So I went back, we trekked up the Khumbu, and we climbed 18 and 20,000 footers. Everest in the background there with a little snow plume coming off the top. And back to base camp, which was scary to be at base camp again, and start going back into that really scary Khumbu ice fall, knowing how the glacier moves and knowing how the earth moves. We worked our way back over some ladders and worked up to Camp 1, up to Camp 2, up to Camp 3 here, looking down from 23,000 feet. When we got to 23,000 for the first time, just below Camp 3, it was pretty good weather that day, pretty sunny weather, brutally cold, of course. And when we got close to Camp 3, we had a little bit of, well, I'll show you what the video shows as we were just below Camp 3. Well, we're going to have to leave that annoying label right there. That's over PK's face, unfortunately, because if I click on it, it's going to shut me down in presenter mode again. So we're going to leave that up for the moment. So at this point, we're at Camp 3. We're trained at, this is the highest you have to go get your body acclimatized. Your first night at Camp 3 will be miserable, but if you can make it through it, your body's fully acclimatized and you're ready to actually make the summit push. And when we make that summit push, we're going to go all the way back to base camp, rest up again, and let our bodies recover a little bit. And then hopefully we're going to get a window of clear weather to turn around, go back up, and go back to camps 1, 2, and 3, up to Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. When we get to that point, we're going to be entering the death zone at 26,000 feet. And we don't call it the death zone because if we stay for a couple days, some of us might die. We call it the death zone because if we stay more than a couple days, all of us will die with complete certainty. Because at that altitude, your body can no longer function. You don't want to eat food. If you eat food, you don't want to digest it. Your stomach hurts. You can hardly sleep. I had a little paper cut on my thumb that lasted 6 weeks and never healed because of the low oxygen on Everest. When I came down and eventually went home, it healed up in about 3 days because, ta-da, there's oxygen now low. So that oxygen can help you do cellular level repair and repair little cuts on your thumb. That doesn't happen at super high altitude. So that's what our plan is, to try and go back up the mountain. And of course, we're going to have to start out in the dark. Now, at this point, I'm not going to keep telling you what happens with the book because you're supposed to read the book. It's not a dirty trick to make you buy it, but I want to stop and not quite give the ending away. I know some of you are partway through the book, and I don't want to spoil too much. But as you can guess from this picture, I got pretty high on the mountain because you don't get this kind of a picture from the base of the mountain or from the Kathmandu airport. We're looking down on Lhotse there, the triangular lit up peak on the right, and then Makalu, and way off in the distance, Kangjigunga, 3 of the top 6 high peaks in the world. So I want to just kind of close up the conversation here from my part and bring you into it. So that's the story about the next Everest. If you're going to join us for our next part, please do. It's going to be in person, yay, if everything goes as well as it has been the last few weeks. We're going to get more information from Always Choose Adventures, so watch your emails and the Facebook. We're going to talk a little bit about teamwork and leadership. We'll talk about the book because more of you will have read it by then. We'll take your questions in person. We'll have a cold drink, and I'll have a few copies of the book there to sell. If you want to get one for somebody else, and I'd be happy to sign yours as well. Regarding the book itself, it's out available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. I know Kevin said he listened to the audiobook. And we're going to see a question from David. We'll get to David's question in a minute. There are going to be 5 international editions coming out. Bulgaria, Czech, India, Italy, and Russia. If you do read Russian, do me a favor and look at the cover here and let me know, did they spell my name right? I'm not even sure because I can't read a darn word of Russian. And please, if you've already finished the book or if you read it over the next couple of weeks, it's tough to promote books right now because we can't get together in person very much. So online postings and reviews really matter. So if you could do that, that'd be a huge help to me on Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, wherever you post them. And if you want to stay in touch, of course, hopefully we'll be in touch and see you on June 10th. But there's my webpage, Speaking of Adventure. I've got more about the books and more videos there. And there's some social media as well. I know a bunch of us all already follow each other on social media, so it's great to be together with some of you. And with that, I am going to stop sharing, bring everybody back in. And Chantel, I'm going to turn it over to you. Come on back in and MC us a little bit through our question and answer. We've just about 5 minutes of. So I'm going to bring you back in. Chantel, you want to take a look at the chat there? I think David said he had a question where he raised his hand. David, if anybody wants to chime in, please turn your mic from mute back to active. Turn on your Zoom camera if you like, if you're not having a bad hair day. And ask your question. David, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. That was great. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Sure.
Yeah, so my question, I read your first book and I've just followed you generally on Facebook and online and stuff, and we've had little chats. This is sort of a personal question, so you don't have to answer it, but I am curious. How do you think your experience that you went through on Rainier played into what you then experienced on Everest? Or do you think that your overall experience in the mountains have sort of made you reactive and prepared for basically anything at that point? Because those are two very intense experiences you've gone through.
Yeah, thanks for that. The survival situation, I was on Mount Rainier where I lost my good friend and Rodney's good friend, Mike Price. That was written up in the first book, The Ledge. That was very traumatic and very intense. But I do think it gave me sort of a boost. It sort of forced me to really look inside myself and find my own sources of personal resilience to get through terrible things like that crevasse fall that happened on Rainier and get through the earthquake. As you can see in the book and some of my posts, I was definitely scared out of my mind on the earthquake and the avalanches. But I think that the experiences I had before did teach me how to recognize that fear, but put it aside a little bit and focus on the problem at hand. So I think my experience on Rainier did make me a more resilient person in the moment and to see how this thing was going to unfold. So I talk about that experience on Rainier a little bit in the next Everest. And if you've read that book, you can see how they kind of go together, yin and yang, so that if you've read one, you can still learn something from the other. So I think it did inform me and hopefully make me a better team member. And when the moment comes to step forward and help with the leadership, hopefully a better leader. So I think it, and that's part of the reason I call the book The Next Everest is, there's always going to be a next opportunity, hopefully a fun climb. There's always going to be a next challenge or disaster, maybe a pandemic, maybe an earthquake. And there's always going to be a next Everest that's going to be fun and challenging at the same time. So I think we have to try and raise our own resilience and add to the resilience of the team wherever you can. So thanks for that, David.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I have a copy on order, so I'm waiting.
Great, thanks. Somebody else got a question?
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Rodney, how's it going, man?
Doing good. Excuse my look. I just drove in from Oregon. For those who may not have read the book yet, or those who may be into it, you included a lot of flashbacks, including some right into your childhood. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but could you explain what your rationale was about adding a lot about your earlier experiences?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Rodney. And if you've read the book or you've read any of my writings, you know about Rodney Lay. He's been my lifelong friend and partner, or not lifelong, but my friend and partner for about 28 years now. I could have never done Everest without him. So he also listened to me think about it while I was writing the book a whole lot. So the question is, so why the flashbacks and why are they there and why in that format? Everybody who writes a book about themselves think, well, everything's about my life is fascinating. Let me tell you about my 8th grade English teacher. Let me tell you about my first prom date. No, that's not that important when we're talking about Everest or the key things in your life. So the trick is to brush in the right pieces, small pieces of your life. And so I actually took some great writing classes with the Lighthouse writers down in Denver. And there I learned about an approach called emotional chronology, which is we don't need your whole background, but when you get to an emotional moment in life where you're psyched about something or you're scared or you're terrified, there's emotions with that. Where does that touch in your brain? What emotional part and what memories and lessons come forth? And so that's what I did when I got to those incredibly emotional moments in the Everest story, to brush in a short episode from the past, hopefully that tells you who this guy Jim is and why he's acting the way he is. So that's the approach. Let me turn back to Rodney. Anything else you want to comment about that, Rodney, or anything else?
Well, I would add to people that it took you a lot of work. I think you had to cut a lot of those out of your book as well. So for those who don't appreciate, some people expect a narrative, which is kind of plotting, and knowing more about the background is like shining the light in the room. It's a worthy piece, although I know you agonized over a lot of those.
Yeah, which means you had to talk me in and go, no, put it in there, put that out. So thanks for your help with the writing as well. I just saw a question pop up. Someone says, Jim, as a geologist, did you have a premonition about that the quake was going to happen? A premonition? Certainly none. As a geologist, did I have any knowledge that it was going to happen? Well, we all know that mountains get built by several reasons, but one is tectonic plates. India moves north and pushes the Himalayas up. That's why Everest is there. That's why we all go there. So that would be foreknowledge. But of course, we tend to think in human terms about days, weeks, maybe years. But these plate movements work on centuries and longer. So no, I didn't have any information that the earthquake was going to happen. It barely even crossed my mind before I went there. I knew from an intellectual standpoint that earthquakes and avalanches can happen, but I didn't think it would happen while I was on Everest. And even after decades of studying, almost hundreds of years of studying, basically geologists can't predict earthquakes. There's a few things we can predict about 30 seconds before the earthquake hits. But what do you do with 30 seconds of warning? Quick, everybody get out of the Himalayas in the next 30 seconds. Something bad's about to happen. It doesn't work that way. So no pre-information at all. Somebody else got a question? Turn on your mic and just speak out.
I don't really have a question. I just have a comment. This is Carrie from Boulder. Right after the earthquake and all the news and, the devastation, I'm really good friends with Pemba Sherpa. His village was hit. And so this time around, just watching, your listening to you and then watching the clip from the news. Wow, that was intense. That was so incredibly intense. I don't know. I'm just kind of taken aback by the whole thing. I don't think it really hit me that hard, except from the human aspect. For Pemba and his, I was more focused on them. But this was really good timing, Jim. Really good timing for the book, because everyone experienced it all over, and we were all helping as much as we could. But this was really powerful. So thank you very much. And thank you to Chantel and Kevin for inviting everyone.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. A lot of people across all over the world did a lot of work to raise small bits of money to help out Nepali friends, and larger, and things like the International Red Cross and the Z Foundation, and all of that was needed. So thanks for helping out and supporting where you could as well. And really, the way I closed the book, and we'll wrap this up in a minute here, is I talked about how there's always a next Everest, there's always a next challenge. And in this case, long before, I started writing the book long before the pandemic came, but I think we've all just had earth-moving, life-changing experiences in the last year and a half that's traumatic on personal levels and business levels and school levels. So we've all kind of been through that. And just like in the quake, no one has easy answers to big problems. You just try and stay as resilient as you can, recognize the emotions, and try and lift each other up to try and to recover and get through these difficult times. We are getting a few more questions. One quick one was, did they move base camp because of this? No, base camp hasn't been moved. And as a geologist, I looked at some old aerial photos and scientific papers. There have been avalanches that have gone through base camp before, probably not associated with quakes necessarily, but there have been other avalanches and there have been other quakes. So will there be another one that'll affect base camp someday? Most assuredly. Is that one day ahead or 1 century ahead? I have no idea. And that's part of the uncertainty of life and adventures. Let me stop there, Chantel. I'm going to turn it back to you for the final comments. Chantel, if you can send something out, there were now 5 people in the waiting room that tried to get in, but it was causing my computer to seize up. So if you can just send out a I'm sorry for the technology approach and that you guys had going on, and just tell them that they can follow up. I'd appreciate that a little bit.
Will do. Can you stop the recording for us?
Yes, I will, if I can get down there. Let me get the right button. So pause or stop.